Good day to everyone. Today, we will be discussing about gender and sexuality as a social reality. Sex is the biological aspect of sex. It refers to male, female, or hermaphroditism or intersexuality. Gender refers to the social interpretation of sex. It is the masculinity or femininity of an individual, whereas sexuality refers to the totality of our own experience of our sex and gender. To further differentiate, sex refers to a set of biological attributes in humans. It is primarily associated with physical and physiological features including chromosomes, gene expression, hormone levels and function, and reproductive or sexual anatomy. Sex is usually categorized as female or male, but there is variation in the biological attributes that comprise sex and how those attributes are expressed. Whereas gender refers to socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people. It influences how people perceive themselves and each other, how they act and interact, and the distribution of power and resources in the society. One way to simplify many components of gender identity, gender expression, sexuality, and biological sex is by using the gender-bred person model, created and illustrated by Sam Killerman, the author of It's Pronounced Metrosexual.com and LGBT advocate. The gender-bred model graphic breaks down the concept of gender into three aspects: sex, gender identity, and gender expression. Gender identity is defined as the personal conception of oneself as male or female. It is the chemistry that composes you and how you interpret what that means. Gender expression is how you demonstrate your gender based on social construct within the culture through the ways you act, dress, behave, and interact. Biological sex refers to the objectively measurable chromosomes, hormones, and organs or secondary sexual characteristics of an individual. Female generally has XX chromosomes, often with manifestation of secondary sexual characteristics including a vagina and ovaries, while male generally has XY chromosomes, often with manifestation of secondary sexual characteristics including a penis and testes. Intersex generally is a combination of X and Y chromosomes beyond male and female chromosomes with manifestation of various combinations or no secondary sexual characteristics. And lastly, sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is who you are physically, spiritually, emotionally, and romantically attracted to based on their sex, gender identity, and gender expression in relation to your own. The following are the types of sexual orientations. Homosexual refers to a person whose sexual orientation is towards another of the same sex. Heterosexual is a person whose sexual orientation is towards others of opposite sex. Bisexual is a person who may be sexually oriented to both men and women. Pansexual is a sexual orientation of persons who are sexually attracted to person regardless of their sex or gender identity. And lastly, transgender. This refers to the broad spectrum of individuals who transiently and persistently identify with a gender different from their natal gender. Women empowerment. Women's empowerment can be defined to promoting women's sense of self-worth, the ability to determine their own choice, and their right to influence social change for themselves and others. It is closely aligned with female empowerment. In Western countries, female empowerment is often associated with specific phases of the women's rights movement in history. This movement is split into three waves. The first, beginning in the 19th and early 20th century, where suffrage was a key feature. The second wave of the 1960s included sexual revolution and the role of women in society. And the third wave feminism is often seen as the beginning in the 1990s. Women's empowerment and promoting women's rights have emerged as a part of major global movement and is continuing to break new ground in recent years. Days like International Women's Empowerment Day are also gaining momentum. But despite a great deal of progress, women and girls continue to face discrimination and violence in every part of the world. The 7 principles are to create a high-level corporate leadership for gender equality, treat all people fairly at work, respecting and supporting non-discrimination and human rights, ensure the health, well-being, and safety of all workers, whether male or female, promote education, training, and professional development for women, implement supply chain, marketing practices, and enterprise development that empower women, champion equality through community initiatives and advocacy, and measure and report publicly on progress to create gender equality. Principle number 1. Leadership promotes gender equality. A firm high-level support and direct top-level policies for gender equality and human rights. Establish company-wide goals and targets for gender equality and include progress as a factor in managers' performance reviews. Engage internal and external stakeholders in the development of company policies, programs, and implementation plans that advance equality. And ensure that all policies are gender-sensitive, identifying factors that impact women and men differently, and that corporate culture advances equality and inclusion. Principle number 2. Equal opportunity, inclusion, and non-discrimination. Pay equal remuneration including benefits for work of equal value and strive to pay a living wage to all women and men. Ensure that workplace policies and practices are free from gender-based discrimination. Implement gender-sensitive recruitment and retention practices and proactively recruit and appoint women to managerial and executive positions and to corporate board of directors. Assure sufficient participation of women in decision-making and governance at all levels and across all business areas. Offer flexible work options, leave and re-entry opportunities for positions of equal pay and status, and support access to child and dependent care by providing services, resources, and information to both men and women. Principle number 3. Health, safety, and freedom from violence. Taking into account differential impacts on men and women, provide safe working conditions and protection from exposure to hazardous materials, and disclose potential risks including to reproductive health. Establish a zero-tolerance policies towards all forms of violence at work, including verbal and/or physical abuse, and prevent sexual harassment. Strive to offer health insurance or other needed services, including survivors of domestic violence, and ensure equal access for all employees. Respect women and men workers' rights to time off for medical care and counseling for themselves and their dependents. In consultation with employees, identify and address security issues, including the safety of women traveling to and from work and on company-related business. Train security staff and managers to recognize signs of violence against women and understand laws and company policies on human trafficking, labor, and sexual exploitation. Principle number 4. Education and training. Invest in workplace policies and programs that open avenues for advancement of women at all levels and across all business areas, and encourage women to enter non-traditional job fields. Ensure equal access for all company-supported education and training programs including literacy classes, vocational, and information technology training. Provide equal opportunities for formal and informal networking and mentoring. And offer opportunities to promote the business case for women's empowerment and the positive impact of inclusion for men as well as women. Principle number 5. Enterprise development, supply chain, and marketing practices. Expand business relationships with women-owned enterprises, including small businesses and women entrepreneurs. Support gender-sensitive solutions to credit and lending barriers. Ask business partners and peers to respect the company's commitment to advancing equality and inclusion. Respect the dignity of women in all marketing and other company materials. Ensure that company's products, services, and facilities are not used for human trafficking and/or labor or sexual exploitation. Principle number 6. Community leadership and engagement. Lead by example. Showcase company's commitment to gender equality and women's empowerment. Leverage influence, alone or in partnership, to advocate for gender equality and collaborate with business partners, suppliers, and community leaders to promote inclusion. Work with community stakeholders, officials, and others to eliminate discrimination and exploitation and open opportunities for women and girls. Promote and recognize women's leadership in and contributions to their communities, and ensure sufficient representation of women in any community consultation. Use philanthropy and grants programs to support company commitment to inclusion, equality, and human rights. And lastly, principle number 7, transparency, measuring, and reporting. Make the public company policies and implementation plan for promoting gender equality. Establish benchmarks that quantify inclusion of women at all levels. Measure and report on progress, both internally and externally using data disaggregated by gender. And incorporate gender markers into ongoing reporting obligations.